Hello and welcome back to today's Chatting with episode. Today I spoke with Karen Petrie. Karen Petrie is the Associate Dean for Learning and Teaching in the School of Science and Engineering at the University of Dundee. But we kind of waded through a wealth of experience in terms of critical reflection. How do you reflect upon your own efforts in your own studies? How do you reflect upon feedback that you get? We talked a little bit about our own perfectionist tendencies, and Karen gives some good advice at the end. If you've got a plan B, you might use that plan B. So stay tuned and listen in. Okay, we're recording. Thank you everyone for joining us once again. Today we're joined by Karen Petrie, and I'm just going to start with the first question as is tradition and ask Karen to introduce herself, please.
Hi all, so I'm Karen Petrie. I am the Associate Dean for Learning and Teaching within the School of Science and Engineering, which is a really grandiose title, which really just means that I'm in charge of student experience. I'm also in computing, and I still teach in computing. I still love teaching in computing, and still think of myself really as a computer scientist first and foremost. That's where my heart lies, if I'm honest. During lockdown, I've learned to cycle, and my goal for this month is to cycle 75 miles. I've so far managed 66, and I've got about 4 days left, so I can do it. So that's my sort of personal goal that I'm working through currently.
Yeah, my lockdown plan was jigsaws. So on my holiday, I did this jigsaw.
Ooh.
And what's most exciting about this jigsaw is it glows in the dark.
Probably...
That is the extent of my annual leave excitement, is I did a series of jigsaws.
I should probably tell people I started the jigsaw fairly early in lockdown because it seemed like the sort of thing you should do. And I gave up halfway through and put it back in the box and decided that I am not a jigsaw person. I just don't have the patience, I'll be honest.
I have experienced a lot of personal growth through doing jigsaws.
Maybe I should try again, but I decided that jigsaws were just too stressful and just like not fun.
I had a lot of conversations with myself about the jigsaw. It was good. Okay, so today we're going to talk about being critical and being reflective and why that is important for learning. So this was kind of your suggestion as a topic. So do you want to kick us off with why you think that's an important thing?
I think it's actually a really important thing because to do your best work, and to a certain degree learning is about how to do the best work. What you really need to do is be able to criticize yourself and criticize the work and say, oh, okay, I'm being self-critical. I could do this bit a bit better, or I could do that bit a bit better. And then to reflect then when you get feedback on that and use that to help your growth and to help your learning. And if you're a person that can't self-criticize your work at all, you're actually never really going to grow very much and get better at what you do. I've learned that actually during lockdown. So one of the other things I'm doing lockdown, so I've been applying for a qualification which is called PFHEA, which means I've had to write the equivalent of an MSc dissertation. And it was on a reflective essay style, which I am not good at writing in the slightest. I'm so much of a scientist. All I want to do is write scientific things. And so I was like, okay, how am I going to approach this? So I started by doing a spreadsheet of the topics I wanted to cover because I get spreadsheets, I can do that.
Yep.
And then I put it down as headings, and then I tried to put the reflective critical bits in. I'll be honest, it's taken me about 6 months to write this whole thing. And most of that time has been rereading it and going, no, that doesn't read very well. Or no, that's not what they're looking for. And actually going from that first draft, which I had at the sort of a month, like month one basically, to this final thing that's now been submitted, took about 5 months. And even now, I'll be honest, it could probably still be better. You know, I spent a lot of time polishing it, making it better, really thinking about it, making the deadline, which was the middle of this month. But that polishing has made a huge difference to that document. If I look back at the first draft and the last draft, the two are just complete opposites. And really, it's because I've learned to criticize my work, to have a draft early, to work on it, to refine it, to get feedback from, in this case, I got feedback from colleagues and from my husband, and then to build that into what we do. So I think that process is actually what means that I got this qualification at the end, if I get the qualification, by the way. I won't find out till October, but that if I do, it'll be because, fingers crossed, of this critical reflective process. And I think as learners, for the time you graduate from university, you want to be that person that can actually go through this process with your work and keep improving it until you get to deadline. I would also say though, sorry, I've answered this question for a very long time, I'll stop soon. But I would also say that it's important that you also don't become too much of a perfectionist. There's a real line between criticizing your work and getting it to a point which is good enough for whatever purpose it is, and knowing what good enough means. I could have missed the deadline quite easily and just carried on polishing for another 6 months. And it might have been 5% better, but it doesn't need, I don't think, to be 5% better. So it's about, I suppose, appropriate critical reflection.
Well, that's the thing that I was going to pick up on, is that early on you said, oh, well, it probably could still be better. And I'm thinking, well, like when I was an undergraduate student, I was very like perfectionisty. Like I was really bad for working to the final deadline and just keeping going. And partly that's why I don't set deadlines at midnight for students. I set them at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
So I set, and students always say to me, well, why can't we have until 12? Other people give me until the end of the day. And I'm like, well, if it's 8 o'clock, you can go for a beer, go to bed and start again tomorrow. If you're finishing that at 12 with all the adrenaline of the hand-in and then suddenly you have to go to bed, that's not going to happen, right? That's not a good cycle to be getting into. But that's hard. To stop being the perfectionist and move into what's good enough is really difficult.
Yeah.
What do you think is the way that people can start to move towards good enough?
I think that really is where critical reflection comes in and why it's important. So what I did with this document, of what I suggest students do, is I looked at the marking scheme. So we gave people quite a detailed marking scheme, and I just tried to work out, have I addressed all of these different criteria? And for this thing, there was like 50. So I had, I'll be honest, I had another spreadsheet. I just take them off and said what section it was in.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I suggest students do. Really look at the marking criteria before you start, plan for that, and then look, do I think I've addressed all these things? And that's particularly important for a big piece of work like the honours project. So one thing I see when I'm marking honours projects is that students have often just missed a section or clearly put a lot less effort into a section that didn't really interest them, if I'm honest. It's very easy if there's a bit that's like, this is not in my wheelbag. I really like coding, so I'll do all my work in the coding and I won't do that much in the analysis at the end. Yep. And that can really count against you. So something I would really look for is look at the marking scheme and also think, have I given each section fair treatment? Or have I prioritized the bits that I enjoy doing and maybe the bits that I know I'm good at, and therefore not spent long enough on the other parts?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that I think is kind of the end point for students, right? Yeah. As you get to the honours project, and we want you to be able to kind of self-criticize or self-reflect by that point. But I mean, what kind of ideas do you have for the student that's arriving in level one? Right now, they're likely to perhaps be doing a lot of stuff on their own.
Yeah.
Or a lot of stuff at home. They're needing to be self-directed to do the work in the first place. Adding on a level of self-criticism is probably quite intimidating at that point. And what do you think is a way to start that? Like, how do you remember?
Yeah.
What you did shift from perfectionism to reflection? So
I started university 20 years ago this year. So it is quite a long time ago, but I do pretty much remember. I have to say, I am quite an organised person and I like to be organised. And I think part of it is leaving time for that bit of the process. It's actually not working to the deadline. It's knowing that the deadline is, say, 8 p.m. on Friday. So I'm going to finish and have my first draft by 8 p.m. on Thursday. So I've got time to at least review it, work on it, criticise it, and then move on. And the first year, probably a few hours or even at most a day, it's all it's going to take to actually do that kind of self-reflective and criticism. But it's making sure that you build time in to do that. I think it's really key. I think the other thing is we're talking about people working alone and self. It doesn't have to be working alone. And even online, it's a far bigger piece of work, but I got other people to look at it and to help me and to criticise it. find a buddy, find somebody that you can say, okay, here's the report for the code we've just written. The code itself, by the way, probably needs less critical reflection, because to a certain degree, things like code, things like mathematics, are you right or wrong? But it's things like the report that goes along with it that you can really look at the improvements on. You can look at the code. Code review is definitely a thing people do. In particular, look at things like, has it got comments in it? Is there any bits of the code you're not using? So one of my bugbears when I mark first and second year code is if they use written a whole procedure and then it's never actually called, take it out, or at least make it clear to me that you're no longer using it, which is for testing. So those are things you can do in code review. But where you can actually probably get step changes in the report that goes along with that code. And then I would really suggest having a buddy and looking at each other's. Don't plagiarize, don't copy each other's, but give each other feedback. It's absolutely fine to do that and to read a paragraph and say, oh, that doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. Or you might want to add in this. And that kind of working together can really make your work better, even in level 1. Yeah. But my main tip really is leave time. Yeah. Don't be working to the deadline.
Yeah, the deadline is not the deadline. I've said that so many times, but I want to segue to the plagiarism thing for a second.
Yeah, of course.
And like, I think this is a really thin line for some people. And if you're not sure, you should speak to someone, right? Like, just kind of like my soapbox here.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't know, ask a lecturer, ask the tutor, check out the student union stuff. This has got a lot of information on what plagiarism is, because it's not just copying from the person next to you, it's a whole bunch of stuff. So public service announcement, go and look at that information. Okay.
There's also a really good guide, which we'll link to in induction actually, and you'll all get induction, which is on like online learning basically, and what constitutes plagiarism in online learning. So we'll make sure we link to that as well. It's from the library. Yeah, but no, if you're not sure, ask somebody.
Yeah, it's that self-awareness thing.
Yeah, don't be scared of it. I think is the obvious, is kind of also the interesting thing. I hear a lot of students say, "Oh, I didn't get to proofread my work because I was worried about I'd fallen into plagiarism." Proofreading's fine. So I think it's about making sure you get the line correct. And actually, I think some of our students are too scared of plagiarism. Yes. So it's about working out where that line is. And as I say,
especially computing students, where we're encouraging them on one hand to go and use, you know, there are libraries available, there is this available, go and see what's out there and what you can make use of. And then at the same time, you're saying, well, don't plagiarize. But I mean, that's about referencing, right? And for me, that's the thing that students get most hung up about, is how do I reference this function of this code or whatever?
Just put a comment in the code.
Comments are your friend. Comments are your friend.
Yes. If you're first year, just put it in. I think that's the best thing to do, is what I always say, just comment and tell me you got it from someplace. If you got it from someplace, that's fine. And actually, it's really important in computing because we do reuse things from all over the place, from the internet, from the web. When I write a bit of code, I was trying to write a JavaScript loop the other day. I haven't written JavaScript for about 15 years. I Googled it and I just copied, how do you write a JavaScript loop? So that's fine, as long as you make it clear that's what you've done.
Yeah, and I think if you become a developer, you know, the vast majority of what you do will not be writing unique code. It will be building blocks of other things to create something new. So yeah, having that in mind. But I want to talk about like my kind of first inkling that perfectionism wasn't always required. And this must have been about maybe third year of my undergrad. And this is something that I've used kind of briefly myself as a lecturer, which I'm now thinking I should do more of. But we had a cover sheet for essays. So my undergrad was very essay driven, and we had lots of these cover sheets, and one person had created just the traffic lights. You know, I'm pleased about this bit, I'm worried about this bit, or I'm unsure about this bit, and I've got a concern about blah. And for me, that was like, oh, I can have concerns and still submit my thing. Okay. And I remember I didn't put a concern in the first time because I was kind of like, oh, a concern, well, I can't be concerned. If I'm concerned, then I don't know the answer and I can't be concerned. And I remember the next class is he just put up this list on the board. These are all the things everyone is concerned about. And I was like, oh yeah, me. And that was the first point. I was like, okay, this is just a collection of people that have all got different ideas, and we all have the same worries, and to be worried about an assignment that you've still submitted is actually okay. It can
It's
still
kind of,
get a good grade. It
yeah,
doesn't matter.
yeah. It's kind of interesting. So I teach a third year module in games programming, as Rachel knows. And I've started, I haven't finished yet, but I've started vlogging myself doing the whole module. So like actually writing a game, actually writing the documentation that I get you guys to write. And one thing I keep on saying in these vlogs is, this is not perfect. Just so you know, that bit of code works, but I'm not saying it's the best way to do it. But actually, it's kind of true. Sometimes you just go, in this case, as a few days ago, I need something that's going to allow me to move this counter along on the screen. And I found this library that lets me do that like with my mouse, pick it up and move it. But I'm not convinced this is actually the best way to do it, but it's working and it seems robustly working. I've tested it quite a lot. So it will do, right? Yep. And if you're doing a huge project like creating a game, sometimes you've got to go with it will, the whole, okay, that works, it will do. Because if you try to perfect everything, you would never actually get there. And I think it's about thinking about which bits you have to perfect. So in this game, I'm doing quite a lot of advanced AI. AI, by the way, is my background for anybody who doesn't know. And so I'm spending quite a lot of time on the AI side. But to a certain extent, that's the bit I want to shine. That's the bit where I'm saying, this is the bit that, you know, I've really done myself and I've coded and is revolutionary. Whereas, to be quite honest, I would expect a third year student, in the same way as I expect me, to be able to find a bit of code that moves a counter on the screen.
Yes.
So it's really about that. Where do you want the perfectionism and where do you not want the perfectionism? That is really difficult. I learned actually not to be too much of a perfectionist in high school. I did higher English, which basically when I was in school, you had to do English and maths again to university. So I had to do higher English, which I hated with a passion because it was mainly English language.
I loved English.
Well, you see, I think I did the wrong English. I love reading. I read so many books. I should have done English literature and I didn't. I did English. And I remember this is one essay I had to write, and I'm going to sound very old here. And the essay title was, "Is the internet a passing fad?" Remember, this is 21 years ago, people. Yep. And I wrote that essay and then kept on giving drafts so like the English teacher would give me comments and feedback. I'd fix those. I'd then give another draft. We did have computers, by the way, so I was doing this on computer. Back to the teacher. And I did this routinely every single week. Every week I gave the teacher a new draft. And eventually she said to me, Mrs. Taylor, I'll never forget, after about 10 weeks, Karen, I'm never not going to give you feedback because it's never going to be perfect. And I'm never going to say, actually, this essay is finished, but you got a grade A about 4 drafts ago. So, you know, you're now like, an A is the highest you can get. You're now absolutely over-egging this. I suggest that maybe you want to concentrate on some different work. And I'll never forget that, and actually taking that on board and thinking, okay, when have I reached the point that I want to reach? The other thing I found quite interesting is actually from teaching the graduate apprenticeship students, who are all, well, mainly mature students who've been in the workplace, come back to university. They really struggle with this. So you think being in their 30s, 40s, 50s,
yep.
they've had got used to this whole perfectionism thing, but they haven't. And I'll tell you why, and I've kind of reflected a bit on why is this? Why do they find it difficult not to get A's all the time and get quite upset when they don't get an A, even for a small piece of work? And I think it's because in life you don't get marked very often. So if you're in the workplace, nobody ever says, A star, Karen, great, well done. I wish they did a bit more sometimes, but nobody marks any work I do for the university. They just say, yeah, fine, and accept it, or come back with some feedback or some comments. And so I think there is something that's a bit artificial about this whole fact that we grade it from A, B, C, and D. And so students want to aim for the top. And even if you're, you know, been working for many years, used to not having to perfect everything and having to do some things quickly because deadlines is the next thing, the fact that it gets a grade somehow changes the way you think about it.
Yeah.
And we do want everybody to aim for A's at all times. I mean, that's ideal. But there are some times in life when I've said to these graduate apprenticeship students I was teaching last summer, and they were first years, you know, this assessment's only worth 1%. You've now spent so much time on this.
Yes.
And you've got
Like
another
big
one
picture.
next to it, 5%, which you've not put any effort into at all. So use your effort wisely. And actually, if you do end up getting a B for this assessment, obviously you don't want to fail it. If you get a B for this 1% assessment, it's not going to affect your overall grade, whereas that 5% one really is.
Yep.
On the other hand, so one thing that concerns me, and I had this a bit in Games program this year with one of the students, is people who don't do the 1% because they think they're too low. And they do add up. So actually,
something.
You need to do something. Maybe you don't give it as much effort as a 5%. In fact, you shouldn't. We're not expecting you to.
Yeah.
But you need to submit something. So I had one student who contacted me to say, why did I fail the module? And I said, well, you failed the module because you didn't do the 20%, which is these 1%. You just didn't do it at all. And you did the other 80%, but then because you only did 80% of the assessments, you had to get far higher grades to pass than if you'd done these 21% things. So if you had spent your time and submitted all assessments, you probably would have overall, in fact, they would have overall passed the module. They only had to get like 10% and these 1% to pass.
Yeah.
So it is difficult.
Yeah, part of that, it's hard to tell whether that's that you discard things that are 1% because you're focused on what you think is the big picture, or whether it's a time management situation that I've got this much time, so I'm only going to do the big picture, and you lose the bits at the side. But that feedback, then, very smooth segue into post-feedback reflection. Once I've got that feedback, how do I action that? How do I reflect on what I've got back from an assessment in a useful way and not in a negative way?
Yeah. So my first advice, and actually this is the same advice I give to even PhD students when you get feedback on papers, because you submit papers to look at feedback, is don't read it the same day you get the feedback. I know that's a big bit of advice and it's a bit strange, but especially if you get a grade of an A and it's higher than you expected, then take the day to celebrate, and enjoy that. If you get a D and it's lower than you expected, then take the day just to go and just have a bit of reflective time to yourself and, watch a movie, eat some ice cream, do whatever you do that sort of cheers you up a bit. Because if you read the feedback, it will always just, for me at least, take me down slightly further. So if I get an A, I want to take time to celebrate that before I read the feedback, because the feedback's always going to have things to criticize, because as we say, things can't be perfect.
Yep.
So I always would say take the grade on day 1. Day 2, reread the bit of work you submitted. Because feedback can be up to 3 weeks, it can often be a while since you actually did the work. So reread the work, yourself criticize it and think, okay, why did I get that grade I got, be it an A right through to a D or a fail even, and then read the feedback and actually think about how does that feedback match what I thought was going to be there.
Yep.
How close am I to actually criticizing my own work in a successful manner? And also think, is there any of that feedback that's, some of it will be specific to that piece of work and can't really be carried forward to next pieces of work. If it's about programming, it might be about giving a function, there might be very little you can take forward. But also think about, what can I take forward? So what can I learn from that to make sure I don't make the same mistakes in my next piece of work? So for me, that's the 2 big things, is what can I learn from this feedback to make sure I don't make mistakes again? And how can I learn to criticize my work better myself so that I am getting the same feedback as this critical feedback is giving me?
Yeah. And I think the thing that people find quite difficult is that they take it very personally. Yeah. Like, I have failed to do this thing and I failed as a person.
Yes.
Well, no, we've just not been successful yet at doing this thing. And that's different. And like, certainly when I get feedback on papers from conferences and stuff, like, well, I've got a very short temper anyway. So I'm like, oh, these people are idiots. They just don't get it. And the next day you're like, well, obviously they don't get it, Rachel, because you didn't explain it. They don't have my brain. Obviously
That's
they don't get it.
Not to read it the same day. You see what I'm getting at with the whole don't look at it the same day.
I hate everyone. And then suddenly you're like, okay, actually this can be okay. But I think that's the really important thing, is to not let it, yes, you're going to be down and disappointed and a bit upset by it, but not to take it as a personal attack or reflection on you, I think is really important.
I think the other thing to really be aware of is I think that's really important, and it's definitely true, but it's also to respect the person who gives the feedback. So where it's a
Yeah,
conversation,
it comes in line with that, yeah.
Some of it's subjective. It's always going to be subjective. There's no way that feedback can be completely, impartial, all the rest of it. But they are an expert. Anything we're teaching, anything we're doing, we really are an expert on. We can, do whatever that thing is. And so it's really important that you respect that person, and you actually, one thing I always say is try and read it as if it's my voice. Try and read it as if I was speaking it to you. Because hopefully I speak to you in quite a respectful manner, and so you'll actually hear that coming through in the tone of the feedback. And know that they are trying to help you. It comes from a place of, I was going to say it comes from a place of love, but maybe that's too strong. But it comes from a place of really respecting you as a student and caring about you and wanting you to do better.
Yep.
And so if it's critical because they think that's what you need in order to do better. But also be careful not to just read the good bits and to ignore the critical bits. I know I think there's kind of two sorts of people in the world, and I think you and I, Rachel, are both on one side, which is we read the criticisms and not the nice bits, and we just take the criticisms to heart and get upset by them. There's also some students I've spoken to who said, oh yeah, but you said this bit was good. And I was like, yeah, but what did I say about the next bit? And so read the whole thing, take the praise, and there's usually will be some praise, take that, but also take the criticisms and think, how can I do better? And try very much not to argue with the person who gives you the feedback.
Yeah.
But realize they're giving it to you from a position of caring for you and wanting you to do better.
But yeah, so that you said don't argue with the person, I think is really important. Open a dialogue.
Yeah. That's fine. Discuss it with
them. Come along
and
and say, look, I've got a question, or I don't really understand, or can you give me a bit more? Blah, blah, blah. But doing that in a positive way, I think, is an element of self-reflection as well, that you've had that reflective process and now you want to build on it rather than just shut the door at the very beginning. I had a really nice interaction with an MSc student this year who came back to me after some feedback that I'd given out. And as a whole, it wasn't an awesomely well completed assignment. And the student came back and was like, well, I just don't get it. Like, I thought I had to do this. Can you explain again to me what it was that you wanted? Because that's not how I interpreted the marks. And so we had a conversation, and the student was very receptive. All right, I see, da. But we ended up having a really, really good conversation about how I had presented that assignment. So although it's not made a difference to, that student's grade or what that class got that year, that's helped me improve.
Yeah.
So this self-reflection is not just that student does work, student gets grade, student does work, student gets grade, right? Like, I can improve in how I deliver that assignment and that grade.
Every single year I rewrite my assignment briefs based on misunderstandings students have had, to try and give more information, to try and help a bit more. Sometimes also to take information out. There was one year where I kind of tried to give too much information as well. So I think all of us are trying to self-improve and trying to learn in the same way as you're trying to learn to be better students. We're trying to learn how to be better lecturers at all time. That's kind of part of our job, really.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the challenge, I think, for students.
Yeah.
That maybe they want to see a complete package. But I think if as a educator, you go, this is the first time we've done this assignment. Here's what I think is going to happen. And then there's that reflection afterwards. I think just being upfront about what I know and what I don't know helps that reflection process, because we're now in the same team, if that makes sense.
One thing I've been saying quite a lot to students is, obviously we're having to do blended learning due to COVID, things will be different. This is different for staff as well. We are, lots of students told they're a bit anxious about coming back. Yep, so are we. I mean, we went into emergency mode for the last 3 weeks of term, and we actually coped very well considering everything. But this is a more planned approach, and it's all new, and it's all quite exciting. I'm quite excited about it. But then also it's part of me that's like, is this going to work? And I'm changing this to be this way because it needs to be online, and this is going to happen and that's going to happen. Will students interact in this way? Will this work? So I think to a certain degree, note that we are humans as well. We care about you. We are absolutely trying our best. We might not always get things 100% correct, but tell us when we don't and we'll try our best to fix them. And that's the sort of dialogues we want to have with you.
Yeah, we're all in an iterative cycle of action and reflection.
Yes, that's a good place to end, actually.
Yes. Yeah, well, actually, I'd like to end with one question that I ask everybody.
Okay.
And the question that I ask everyone is, looking back on your own experiences, if you could give one piece of advice to students, what would that advice be?
Sorry, I'm not sure if you can actually hear me. The bin men are outside and it's very noisy, so I don't.
No,
it's fine. The one piece of advice I think I would give to students is don't be afraid to try things. So the thing you probably don't know about me is I definitely did not go to university to study computing. I ended up with a joint honours degree in computing and mathematics. I went to university to study chemistry. On my 18th birthday, I managed to break a distillation tube with acid in it and pour it into the cut in my finger. And at that point, I decided that chemistry wasn't for me. I wasn't really enjoying it, but that was like the final straw of like, I have had enough of this.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm also, by the way, really clumsy. So the fact I was ever studying chemistry was stupid in the first place, but never mind. And it would have been so easy at that point just to give up on university and just say, this is not for me. But what I did instead was spoke to quite a few of my friends, to my advisor of studies, and said, I'm just really not enjoying this. And they said, like, right, get through, because thankfully we only did one chemistry module in first semester, get through this module. And by the way, Karen, it's mainly exams now and you'll be okay at the exams. So you'll get through this. And then think about where do you want to be? And I changed to maths because I was quite enjoying the maths modules. And then I picked up some computing in second semester, first year. Really enjoyed that, really enjoyed programming. I know that's sad, but I did. I really, really enjoyed it.
People do, that's fine.
I enjoyed the logic thinking behind it. And I also enjoyed the people side. I enjoyed the fact that we were actually thinking about how people interact with computers. And so I decided that that's where I wanted to go. And I changed to that degree topic. And so I think the main thing I would say is it's okay to have a plan. And I am a planner in life, so I also have a plan, but it's okay to change it. The other time that I massively changed my plan is when I fell in love with my husband and got married. I never planned to get married at all. I had a very good job, which I gave up to move to the same country as my husband, who at that point was still doing his PhD. I'd finished my PhD, and got a new job that was actually in some ways a slightly lesser job, so that we could be in the same country. I still in some ways can't believe I did these things. It's very not Karen to do these things. I did. And so I think my main advice throughout your degree, throughout life, is it's okay to have a plan. It's also okay to decide to go off plan if things change. And so
yeah, and I think students and viewers will be quite surprised actually if you go around the staff or even the students at your institution and was this your plan, the answer will mostly be no. Either I had no plan or this was not my plan, right?
I definitely didn't plan to be an academic. I mean, my dad did go to university, but later in life, there wasn't a huge family history of people going to university. Most of my family are teachers, and at that point, that was a college qualification and not a university qualification. So I didn't even really know that lecturers, well, I kind of knew they existed. But the idea of being one and being an academic just never occurred to me at all. Yeah. I went to university to be a chemist, and I ended up coming out with a PhD in artificial intelligence and being, Associate Dean of Learning and Teaching, and finding I really like teaching in higher education. So it's okay to change the plan and to decide you want to do something different, but do it positively. Don't just say, okay, I spilled this acid in my cut, I'm just never going back to chemistry lab, I'm not studying chemistry anymore, and just drop out of university. Think proactively, okay, I've done this, and I make a change, even if it's just within modules or whatever it is. Speak to people, speak to your advisor of studies, come to us for help, that's why we're here. And we will help you make your new plan, and that's fine.
Yeah, okay. So, changing plans is fine. Changing plans is good. Changing plans is okay. Changing plans is in some way expected.
It's life.
It's life. Okay, so we will finish up there because I know we've both got other many important active learning teaching things to do. So thank you very much for coming along. It's been great. And yeah, at some point I'll reflect. All right, I'm going to stop recording. Stop.